Half of life is showing up. That's my observation for the day. This was from my mother, Emily Sue. This is a bit of Southern living wisdom. Half of life is showing up, and you all showed up here today. And you showed up last night, and we're going to keep showing up in all of these venues. And I think that was one of the messages that I took indirectly from the previous speaker, is it showing up at each one of these opportunities, showing up at planning commissions, showing up at public hearings, showing up at city hearings, showing up at city hall, showing up in the offices of legislators makes a huge difference. Showing up in their email inboxes, showing up on their Facebook pages, making these issues known are the only way that we're going to get anywhere with this. And I really wanted to applaud the previous speaker for pointing out that this is really about democracy in the public space. And that was, I think, one of the great take-homes from today. I also want to go back in history a little bit. So here's something, that's a great lesson from the present, but here's in history. And I really love this line. Lady Bird, I think, is going to always be in my mind as somebody who reminds us that wherever flowers bloom, so does hope. And it's an important point about the renewal. Why is it that we think flowers are so beautiful? It's because it's a symbol of renewal. At the very beginning, our great host of this symposium, Ron, pointed out that what we were here today for was the beginning of a conversation. And that Scenic America and perhaps had one of the great superpowers, its talent to annoy. But we've talked today about more than just annoying. It's a talent of moving together with other people and bringing forth uncomfortable truth, which I think is actually the better definition of annoy, is bringing forth the uncomfortable truth. Cokie Roberts at lunch reminded us very importantly a couple of key points I wanted us to remember as we go from here. Saying that any problem is too big is a cop-out. I want to repeat that. Saying that any problem is too big is a cop-out. That's an excuse. An excuse is a monument to nothingness built on a foundation of non-existence, and those who specialize in making them are seldom good at anything else. Take that home with you. Every spring in D.C., all of us who've had a chance to be here are reminded of this legacy that Lady Bird left us. And she could have sat there and said, this problem is too big. D.C. is too broken, is too corrupt, is too much the fetid swamp that so many people thought it was to begin with. But no, she left it a better place, and that's the challenge to each one of us. Henry Diamond reminded us how important it is to have a president of the United States who says, y'all come in, and is willing to roll back the rugs of the White House instead of standing on ceremony. And that's something we should be looking for in all of our elected officials. Margaret and Bill gave us a great presentation reminding us of 5 key important points. The Texas Green Ribbon Initiative is a great example of how you can take an obscure environmental statutory provision related to the Clean Air Act and turn it into a victory for beauty. These two things can be married. We talked a lot about HBA, and I think in the language of my son's generation where hashtags get put on anything, we can just call hashtag epic fail on HBA, but we can't give up on it. There are things that are good for that. We did learn that pictures win. We also were reminded of something that Charles Kuralt told us long ago, that people want beauty. People want beauty, and we've got to get those people's voices back in front of our decision makers. Martha and Meg gave us a great description, and I'm just going to summarize it by saying they paved paradise and put up a parking lot. I was surprised she didn't have that big yellow taxi on there, but that seemed like one of the things we're talking about. And we've had great successes in community preservation, though, through the National Historic Preservation Act and through the use of tax credits and private investment. One of the things that was challenged to us from Meg was to have a research agenda and to also use visualization tools. And I thought this was a great idea. If you can go to Lowe's and see what your kitchen would look like, why can't we go and figure out what our neighborhoods would look like? And why can't we look like what our communities would look like? This technology is the same. It would be easy for us to do. Katherine and Adrian gave us a good discussion about the history of this movement as it relates to parks and gave us an encouraging sign that the glass is really half full. Much has been accomplished with the parks, but there is this political failure in Washington on the Land and Water Conservation Fund. When we were writing this chapter, I can tell you, we were actually not sure about whether to include this because we were so certain that it was logical that that would have had to have been enacted into law by now. In fact, when I talked to members of the coalition, they said, well, you can put it in there, but I bet you'll have to report to people that it's passed because, I mean, who's against it? And anyway. It hasn't passed, so we're going to push for that. We also learned that we have to be visionary doers who are polite and persistent, but that's also known as people who sue, sue, sue. I thought that was a really interesting thing. Hal and Rob gave us a really good perspective on the ways in which the Congress's failure to appreciate how the dollars they invested in byways have paid off is a great disappointment, but that has opened up new opportunities and new ways of looking at byways going forward. And we were reminded of the irony of the Gettysburg Tower, something that was erected in order to create visual opportunity, but was just an example of visual blight. We recognized that we need more Gatlinburgs and less Pigeon Forge examples, and that Acadia Park Gateway is a great example for us all the way through. Mary and Sherry pointed out to us that undergrounding of wires, the cost is real, but it can be overcome, and that the cost of trees is something that is not being adequately considered. Now, the President's panel gave us a wonderful opportunity to, I think, overall look at 4 key points for us. One is that we as an organization have significant overlap with all the organizations that were represented here today. We don't overlap on all issues, but we have significant issue overlap. And they're willing to work with us, and we're more than willing to work with them, and all of us have an interest in bringing our common values forward to the next generation. Lastly, I want to remind you of some of the things that Dave said that I thought were really important. One is that we need to be explaining to people that this is about choice at the local level in cities. What is our choice about how we're going to do in public space? And this idea, I want to call it, look at the size of my logo. The smaller the logo, the more valuable the property. And when we start putting up these big splashy logos, we are cheapening our public spaces. Now, lastly, I would like to turn this back over to our distinguished host, who reminded me at the very beginning of this, when we decided to call this a symposium, what the meaning of a symposium is. And a symposium goes back to the Greek philosophers, and it was, in fact, a drinking party. And the purpose of a symposium was to debate, to plot, and to revel. And rather than standing in the way of the debating, the plotting, and the reveling, I will turn the podium back to our host. Thank you.